Man will fall to her darkness. Those who call the shadows home will rise again.
Okay, I'd appreciate a prophecy with smaller and more relatable stakes.
2019's Hellboy is a movie that earned itself an achievement that usually you try to avoid, being one of the first notable Hollywood disasters of the year. It's a movie that most people didn't see, and at the same time a movie that the few people who did see, most of them strongly didn't like what they saw. And if you think that's unfair to say, keep in mind that one of those latter people was Hellboy himself.
We did our best, but there's so many voices that go into these things and they're not always going to work out. I did what I could do and I feel proud of what I did, but ultimately I'm not in control of a lot of those things.
Looking at all these aspects of commercial and critical and audience reception failure at face value, a lot of you might say that it was always obvious, that you could see this coming a mile away, which is fair. But that said, if you examine this movie a bit closer and also compare it to others in recent Hollywood history, you might notice that the highly negative outcome it ultimately landed in, it's actually a bit unexpected, and even more than that, pretty weird. Because simply put, 2019's Hellboy shares a lot of similarities with a certain other film. A film that was not only a massive commercial success, but also highly loved by pretty much everybody. A little old film with the title Avengers Infinity War. Okay, and before we start pulling out pitchforks and accusing me of blasphemy for daring to speak the word Avengers in connection to Hellboy, just hold on. When I say Hellboy shares a lot of similarities with Infinity War, that's actually an understatement. Because at times, it feels like it's the exact same movie. At times, it feels like the filmmakers of Hellboy saw Infinity War and then were like, oh yeah, this is great, let's do this. You could maybe discuss the similarities separately on a minuscule level all day, but because I don't want to be here all day, let's instead divide all of it down to a few bigger categories: plot, characters, environment. The plot of Hellboy is all about the heroes having to stop the bad side from collecting multiple artifacts that would create an unstoppable force that threatens life on a massive scale. The movie also features a huge roster of different characters with all kinds of different backgrounds that either have to come together or clash together or both. Plus, it takes place in multiple different environments, not only all over the world, but also in more obscure corners of existence. Any of that sound familiar? And yet, despite essentially copy-pasting the core of Infinity War, this film still just doesn't work. Obviously, it's never a good idea to make the grand finale be the first movie in your franchise, but that aside, I'm more interested in the details. And so, let's figure out how Hellboy does the same things as Avengers and why they don't work here like they do in Avengers. Let's see how exactly Hellboy failed at Infinity War. In essence, the plot of this movie is that there's this evil man-bear pig who's running around trying to round up these ancient artifacts in order to resurrect an ancient super powerful witch who will then unleash an unstoppable deadly plague that will wipe out human life just like that. And the mission of Hellboy and his friends is to stop that from happening before it's too late. In other words, it's basically the same plot as in Infinity War, like down to the numbers. 6 Infinity Stones, 6 artifacts. It's just that instead of stones, here those artifacts are, you know.
So he had her cut up into pieces, each one locked in a separate casket.
This is not over. I am vengeance eternal. No!
Arthur then ordered his bravest knights to ride off and bury her wretched remains in the far reaches of the land where no one would ever find her.
And so, since we have this extremely high-stakes plot that's all about a tense race against time, by logic, it should work. I mean, it worked just fantastic in Infinity War, but of course, it doesn't work at all. And as to the reason why, there's actually a couple sides to it. Firstly, because here the heroes aren't involved in the plot until much later on. In Infinity War, the hero side learns about Thanos' plan right away and instantly hops into action in order to stop him. It yanks the audience right into the experience. It's all go, go, go. It's why this movie arguably has the strongest first act in the MCU.
What is this guy's problem, Mr. Stark?
He's from space. He came here to steal a necklace from a wizard. Kid, that's the wizard. Get on it.
On it!
But in 2019's Hellboy, it's the opposite. Even though we have this pig running around collecting the artifacts, Hellboy doesn't even know about it until there's just one chest left. Instead, in the meantime, he's just casually squaring off against these British hunters and these random giants that have absolutely nothing to do with the main plot. And so, instead of getting pulled right into the experience, instead of getting the sense of go, 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 the audience only has this slow, bored feeling of why are we watching this random unrelated stuff when there right now is this hugely important thing going on elsewhere. The second reason the plot doesn't work in Hellboy is because the ultimate deadline of defeat is constantly moved further and further back. You know how in Infinity War it's made clear at the start that if Thanos gets all the stones, we lose. And when he ultimately does get the stones, what happens? We lose and the movie ends. In Hellboy, when the plot finally does become evident to the heroes, the deadline is set up in a very similar, clear way.
Also known as the Blood Queen. An immortal 5th century sorceress. Amongst her powers, she has a plague that almost wiped Britain off the map, and this time it could be the world.
Great, so we go back to the Osiris Club, we find this casket, we figure out who's ever trying to Humpty Dumpty this Blood Queen back together, and we get a little payback.
Essentially, the movie proposes the stakes that if the witch is brought to life, she will unleash a plague that destroys humanity. Okay, so that's the deadline. That's what we have to prevent from happening. But then in the very next sequence, Hellboy loses the last artifact and the witch is brought to life at the midpoint. Okay, so I guess the movie ends after just 1 hour. But luckily, then it turns out that no, that's not actually the real last deadline. Turns out that now the witch also has to go to this tree to get her powers back. Okay, well, I guess that's the real deadline. That's what we have to prevent. Oh, now she did that. Now she escapes through a portal like Thanos and releases the plague. Well, the end, I guess. But wait, now it turns out that this isn't the real last deadline either. We can still stop the plague if we stop her. And then it turns out that she doesn't actually want to use the plague at all, but instead just wants to use Hellboy to turn the world into real-life Dark Souls for some reason. How can the audience ever feel the time-related stakes of your plot when you constantly keep changing and altering them? It's not like Thanos got all the stones and then suddenly had to go find batteries for the glove and also wait for the stars to be aligned. Because that's basically what this movie does, and that's why it doesn't work. Because if you don't stick to the deadlines you set and instead keep on giving your heroes second and third and fourth chances, none of your stakes have any impact. Nothing feels like it matters. Much like Infinity War, Hellboy the movie packs a big amount of more or less central characters into this 1-2-hour movie. Obviously, we have Hellboy. Then there's also his friend Agent Ruiz, who dies in the beginning. Then there's Hellboy's dad and the American supernatural police force they work for. Plus also the British equivalent of the supernatural police they unite forces with. And also this prophecy lady that's there. Then there's the young girl from Hellboy's past. Plus also other British police who aren't traitors like the earlier ones. And the Asian guy who serves as their leader. Also, let's not forget all the flashback characters like King Arthur and Merlin and German N-words and Rasputin and this World War II superhero guy. And the villains, giants, the man-bear pig, the witch, Baba Yaga. The list goes on, but you get the point. A lot of characters all coming together for this one massive global high-stakes story, just like in Infinity War. But if you compare these movies side by side, you might notice one big difference in character, or actually 18 differences. The reason Infinity War was the first of its kind is because it should be impossible to make a movie like this work. There's no way you can properly introduce this many characters to the audience in one movie. Luckily though, Infinity War didn't have to, because the MCU already had 18 movies beforehand to do so. And by comparison, how many movies did the rebooted Hellboy franchise have beforehand? Oh, none. I'm sure you can already tell where I'm going with this, but just to give an example, let's compare the beginnings of these movies, because they begin with the exact same character moment, the hero losing someone close to them.
That was a mistake.
When Thor loses Heimdall and Loki at the hands of Thanos, it's a pretty powerful moment, because I not only know who Heimdall and Loki are, but also what they mean to Thor. But when Hellboy loses his friend Agent Ruiz and then gets all depressed about it, I genuinely couldn't care less. Why? Because I have no clue who this Agent Ruiz is. To be honest, I don't even know who Hellboy is. And because of that, the supposedly powerful character moment ends up being just boring, unemotional noise. The same mentality carries throughout the whole movie. There's a big bunch of characters here, but all of them feel like just noise, because there's so many of them all around the world that there's no time to properly introduce who they are or who to pay attention to. It gets to the point where instead of introducing characters visually by showing their choices and actions and whatnot, the movie just has characters say stuff about themselves and others and then expects the audience to accept it as truth just because it says so.
I was an actuary. I assessed risk based on a series of complex mathematical equations, and from where I stand, Hellboy doesn't add up.
I now only live to kill him.
I too have suffered at Hellboy's hands.
We're so certain of your potential, and you have done so much good.
Behind you!
Where'd you learn how to do that?
I don't know. Ever since the fairies took me, I've been able to do some weird shit. I don't know.
There's also a big bunch of flashbacks to go with people telling stuff. There's one for the witch and King Arthur, there's one for Hellboy, there's one for the pig and the girl, there's one for the Asian guy. Flashbacks can be useful to show where characters come from, but you still have to show who they are now. And if your movie needs an introductory flashback for every main character, maybe instead of making this massive story with a crap ton of more or less important people all around the globe, you first should make a smaller movie focusing exclusively on just your main characters to introduce them. Kingsman didn't begin with the British uniting forces with the Americans. It began with just Eggsy and Harry, because if you don't first make the audience care about your characters, they're not gonna care about your movie. If we didn't already know just how powerful Hulk is when Thanos beats the crap out of him, that moment would mean absolutely nothing. Like I've already briefly hinted at, the last big similarity that connects Hellboy to Infinity War is the sense that it's this massive story that takes the audience all around the globe and even beyond it. So much so that it often has to resort to using white location text, just like Infinity War. We're in Mexico, we're in the US, we're in Scotland, we're in England, we're in Hell on Earth, we're in whatever this is. Our hero Hellboy does go to a lot of places. The problem is, he doesn't go there by his own will and choice. In Infinity War, our heroes always have a clear, strong goal that they're actively chasing. Tony Stark's team heads to Titan because they plan to take Thanos head on. Captain America's team heads to Wakanda because they plan to destroy
the Mind Stone
before Thanos can get it. Thor's team heads to the dwarf home because he plans to craft himself a new weapon to defeat Thanos with. Wherever we go, it's always because our characters are driving the story there. In Hellboy, however, our hero is getting driven by the story. He doesn't have a goal he's actively chasing. He's just an inactive passenger in his own movie who goes to places either because he's told to do so or because he's taken there by others.
Look, sorry about Louise, but we gotta take it back.
Our organizations have a long-standing relationship. They're old friends of mine, and they've requested your assistance with a giant problem.
Get some rest, Hellboy. The hunt will assemble at dawn.
There he is. That's him.
Let's get him. We are so very glad you accepted our invitation.
Wasn't really my choice.
This inactivity problem we're talking about now, it has roots in a plot problem we talked about earlier. As in, it's impossible for the hero to have a strong, clear goal related to the plot when he doesn't even yet know the plot exists. And after 40 minutes, Hellboy does finally find out about the plot when his dad explains that the pig is after the witch's body parts, which should make this problem go away. But even then, not really. Even though he technically on paper now does have a goal of stopping the witch, it still doesn't work. Simply because he doesn't seem all that excited or motivated about it.
Let's say we find Nimue, huh? Let's say we find her. Then what?
Well, with a righteous fury and a mighty fist, you'll smite her down.
Then what?
Then the world will keep on spinning and we'll have another cup of tea.
Then what?
Then we make sure she doesn't come back for the sequel.
Mission accomplished. Good work.
The reason why having a passive inactive hero is so dangerous is because it makes the whole experience dull and tiresome. I mean, just think about it. If the main hero of your movie isn't enthusiastic about the main plot of your movie and constantly being the one pushing things forward, why would the audience ever be enthusiastic about it? And not only that, it can also very easily make the whole movie confusing. For example, when Hellboy is summoned by Baba Yaga.
Going down.
Pushed up!
Going down.
Up!
Going down.
Wasn't really my choice.
I'll give the movie credit for the interesting visuals, but when I'm watching this scene play out, I'm mainly just confused as to why I'm watching it. Why is Hellboy currently having dinner with Baba Yaga? I would know if Hellboy came here out of his own choice to pursue some important goal, but because he didn't and instead was just suddenly brought in by her, I have no clue. And that, in a nutshell, is what inactive heroes without clear strong goals and motivations do. They not only make movies dull, but also confusing. And together with the two earlier points, they have the power to take even the most incredible, amazing film like Infinity War and turn it into something else.